and welcome to the Art of Being Human. You know, I've mentioned before that veterans come back and they have a problem. They have emotional problems because they've seen too much, they've done too much, and it really hurts them. And sometimes they come back to nothing. The families are gone, and they have all kinds of emotional problems and physical problems. Sometimes they don't even have a place to live. So I've taken the liberty to post a couple of numbers. Actually, the numbers are the same. And the number is for the Veterans Crisis Hotline. And if you know of a veteran, or if you are a veteran and you need help, this is a hotline that you can call to receive the help that you need. And I imagine that they will refer you to medical help, psychological help, maybe even help you find a place where you can have an apartment of your own. That number is 1-800-273-8255. Now, it just happens to be the same number as the suicide hotline, and I wrote that down too. I just printed it below, but it's the same number, 1-800-273-8255. And the reason for the suicide hotline is that we know that about 22 veterans a day try to kill themselves. Well, what must it be like for them? Put yourself in their shoes, and I think this is what compassion is consisted of. You put yourself in their shoes. You've fought for your country. You've done all kinds of things that maybe you didn't even want to do, but you had to do, and you fought and fought and fought for your country, and then you come back and no one's patting you on the back, nobody's giving you any help, nobody's saying congratulations, although I see that that is starting to change, whereas people are thanking the veterans for their service, and I'll do the same, thank you for your service. But if you need help, you can get it. Don't lose hope. Just keep hanging in there and call the crisis hotline, or if you are not a veteran but you know of a veteran, or you're a spouse of a veteran and you see the problems that they're having, call the hotline for them, and help will be available. And I want to spread this, far and wide, because I want them to get the help that they so desperately need. And I will be continuing with this on grief and bereavement, and then after that I'm going to be going into suicidology, because so many veterans do try to commit suicide, plus the fact that a lot of elderly people try to commit suicide. They lose their friends, everybody's all gone, they may be the only one left of their family or of their friends, and they need help too. So the suicide hotline is actually for everybody who needs it, who is suicidal, contemplating it, needing help with the thoughts that they're having about suicide, or if they've had a loved one that has just died from suicide, they need help with that as well, plus for the veterans. So I think the same number will get you both types of people, the help that they need. So we'll go on from that. Now we're talking about grief and bereavement. I want to spend a few minutes here, and it may take the rest of this session, to help you if you are getting anxiety and if you're getting depression. Is there a thought process you can use to help you? And I think there is, and so I've jotted some things down. It's taking a little bit of a breather in terms of symptoms of grief and bereavement that I was planning, but I think it's important. And if you can remember these things, you will be helped just by knowing these things are true. So let me begin. There'll be a series of thoughts and thought patterns that I'm going to give you that I think will be a help to you if you are suffering from grief, bereavement, anxiety, or depression. Anything like that, I think you'll be helped by this. So I'm giving you some additional notes today. Now you have to remember that we think of ourselves as being intellectual people, and I mentioned this during the last segment. We think of ourselves as being intellectual. We have a problem, we analyze the problem, we solve the problem. And that's all well and good, but the truth of the matter is that we are emotional beings, and we tend to react emotionally to things more so than intellectually. I know as a college student, I always admired those professors who everything was in control, everything was explainable. If a problem came up, well, let's analyze it. There's this, there's this, why don't we do that, and the problem will dissipate and all will be all right again. And I said, boy, what a marvelous facility they have. They don't have to go through a whole lot of emotions. They look at a problem and they solve it. And I think as human beings, we think of ourselves as doing that. We have a problem, we solve the problem. However, it's the emotional piece that we leave out. And most people who are not intellectually trained, most people who are more emotional than intellectual will react very negatively and emotionally to things that happen to them. That's the reason sometimes that we have shootings. I mean, that's not the only reason, but there's a part to play. If you react emotionally and you're angry and you find that nothing can take away your anger, then you get into a state of rage, and then you're apt to act out that rage. And at the moment that you act that out, you have become abusive and you've stepped over the line. And even though you may have justifiable reasons, then it doesn't give you the right to step over the line. You have to be able to hold yourself in check. Well, how do you do that? And how do you escape the depression and the anger and the anxiety that you feel from things that happen to you in everyday life? Why do you have to suffer from it? Well, there are ways that you can kind of help with your thinking process to help you out of it. If you start, and I did talk about this a little in the last segment, if you acknowledge your emotions, and acknowledge them. Yes, I am angry. Yes, I'd like to kick somebody. Yes, I'd like to react violently. And just acknowledge it. Not that you have to take action on it, and you would never want to take action on it, but you feel like you want to. Acknowledge to yourself that you're angry, and it's all right to be angry. There's nothing wrong with having human emotions. It's what you do with the human emotions that count. And if you will acknowledge your emotions, they will lessen in intensity. And even if you tell people, and it might be helpful for you to tell some people, but you don't have to announce it to the world. You may have a best friend, and you can say, I'm really angry about this or that or the other. It helps to dissipate the emotions, because what happens in the body is the body wants to be recognized. The emotions need to be recognized. And so many times we feel guilty because we have emotions. And what happens is we try to shove them down. No, I will not be nervous. No, I will not be angry. I'm not going to feel those emotions today. But the problem is you're not in control of what you're going to experience and how you're going to feel. Your body takes over. And so if you acknowledge it, then it doesn't have to fight so hard to be recognized. If your body is trying to help you to recognize the fact, or your mind is trying to help you to recognize the fact that it's upset, that it's nervous, that it's angry, that it's desolate, and you can acknowledge that. Yes, I realize that. That's the way I'm feeling today. And that's all right. It's all right to have emotions. And if you can acknowledge that and then affirm the fact that you're not going to have those emotions forever, it's going to die down. It's going to simmer down. If you acknowledge it, then you actually are acknowledging what your body is trying to get you to recognize and what your mind is trying to get you to recognize. And when you acknowledge it and it's recognized, it doesn't have to fight for that recognition. And then the emotions simmer down, and they're not as strong, and they're not as hard to deal with. So that's just something for you to remember. You have to realize that emotions fade. And there is a fear that people have, especially if they're depressed, that their emotions will stay forever, that they'll never be able to get rid of the feelings of depression. There is something about depression that it's not just being blue. Everybody has their blue days, but in a clinical depression, it goes much deeper than that. And there's a fear that you're kind of in this cage and you can't get out of it, and you're always going to have this depression and you're never going to be able to get out of it. That is one of the symptoms of clinical depression. And if you recognize that as being a symptom, then you will help to relieve it. And also, the human body was never made to be subjected to one kind of emotion and only one. I can think of a condition, unipolar depression, but most people don't have unipolar depression. Most people get depressed, and as you start to feel better, the anxieties, the fear, as well as the depression start to lift. And then you're better for quite a considerable period of time, and then who knows, it may strike again, because these things tend to be cyclic. There are some people that have cyclic problems, and every so often they'll dip down. It's a part of their cycle, and then they'll come back up. That's a part of the cycle too. So remember, it might be helpful to you if you're having a problem to be able to document it. Take a calendar and write down every day, sad, sad, desperately sad, better, much better, okay now. And just follow that through and do it for maybe 3 or 4 months or so. I know it's a pain, but do it for 3 or 4 months or so, and then you'll be able to look back and you'll be able to see a cycle. Every 3 weeks you're depressed. Every 5 weeks you're depressed. It lasts for 4 days, and then you're over it. And then another 3 or 4 weeks, you're down for 4 days, and then you're over it. So you have to keep a document it. You have to document it. You have to keep writing it down until the fact where you can establish the cycle, because bodies do have a cycle. Everybody has a cycle. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody dips down into depression, but some people, they have a little 2 or 3 days where they don't feel good, then they come back up again. And some people, it's deeper. If you're finding that you're bothered by it because you're going so deep that you're bothered by it, you need to document it. Then you can go to a doctor and say, I've noticed that I go according to a cycle. Show him the calendar, let him see what it is. And then he can work with you, maybe give you medication, maybe not. There may be other ways other than medication to deal with it, but you may need medication. And then you may have a diagnosis. Maybe you have a psychological condition that you didn't realize that you had. It's not an awful thing to have. It can be treated. It's very treatable. But you need to remember that most people, they're not going to be subject to a certain fear or a certain emotion over and over again, never getting out of it. The fact that you fear that you're never getting out of a certain depression means that the depression is deeper than what you realized it is. But when it lifts, and it will, then you're going to have total relief. I had a young man come to me once when I was a college professor, and I'm not giving you any personal information except that he went through a cycle like this. And every few weeks, he didn't know what he was going to do. He was so depressed. And so we started learning about his cycle, and he could tell when it was coming on. He knows how long it would last. And what I told him to do is when he got down into the lowest point, tell himself, it's nothing but part of your cycle. You will lift up. You've lifted up before, you'll lift up again. It's one of those things that's going to happen because this is what your body does. The body was not made to sustain one uncomfortable emotion and never get out of it. The body was not created for that. But if you do get down, remember you've gotten up before, it's going to happen again. And when they look at their cycles and they see what their cycles are, they understand that this is going to be short-lived. I've got 2 or 3 more days of it, then I'll be over it. And it always worked with him because that's what his body did. So you have to be aware of what your body does, and then when you're aware of what your body does, you have an awareness of what's going to happen, how long it's going to take, how long you're going to get over it. And you don't have to be saddled when you're in the deepest part of it with the feeling that you'll never get over it. Most people don't go down that far anyway, but some people do. They have a cycle, and they're cyclical in the way that they handle their emotions, and their body is doing it. And the reason you can't force your body to change is the fact that it's a part of what your physical nature is like. It's a part of what your gene structure is. It's a part of how your body handles emotions. And you can't necessarily change that. Medication can help when it's needed, but you can't necessarily change that. But if you can acknowledge it and know what the cycle is and realize that this cycle is temporary because you're going to move on to another part of the cycle, then you can give yourself an immense amount of relief. So I'm urging you to think about doing that. Now, anticipatory fear, I want to mention that. Anticipatory fear is when you have something legitimate coming up. You have a doctor's appointment, you have surgery, you have something that's definitely coming up, you're not making it up, and you have an abnormal fear of what that's going to bring. Say you have a lump on your arm, you just know it's cancer. I mean, you haven't been diagnosed and you're going to the doctor for the diagnosis, but you just know it must be cancer, and you get yourself all worked up without knowing what it is. So you anticipate the worst. You're going to take a test. You know you're going to flunk it. And so because you know you're going to flunk it, you're telling yourself you're going to flunk it. And what you do is you get all of the emotions that are associated with failing, or all the emotions that are associated with having cancer, or whatever the situation is. You can have anticipatory anxiety over anything. Supposing you're going to give a speech, and you're terrified to give a speech because it's going to be with a group of people, and you want to do a good job, and you just know you're going to flub up. Or supposing you're doing a solo, you just know you're going to play some wrong notes, and you get so worked up over the anticipation of your failure that you're almost certain to fail and not do as well because you just know. You've talked to yourself, you've told yourself that you're going to fail or you're going to have a bad time. The idea is, if you realize this is anticipatory fear, then you can get over it. Because you can tell yourself, I'm a great believer in self-talk, you can tell yourself, this is just anticipatory. I don't know if I've got cancer. I haven't even been to the doctors. How do I know I'm going to miss notes in my solo? So what if I do? You know, it's not going to be the end of the world. Or what if I give a speech and I mispronounce a word? So what? You know, you can take a much more free kind of association with it, a laissez-faire kind of emotion with it. You're not going to destroy yourself if anything like that happens. So when do you lose your anticipatory fear? Usually when you're in the process of actually doing that thing or going to that place that you're afraid of. So you're afraid of the dentist, you're afraid that he's going to hurt, you don't like to have dental work done, and some people have a real fear of it, and you're anticipating how bad it's going to be a week or so before your appointment is listed. And then when you get there and you're sitting in the chair, and you're talking with the doctor, and you're talking with the nurse practitioners, whoever is there, the dental assistants, that's what I meant to say, the fear goes away. And the reason the fear goes away is that it's not anticipated anymore. You're actually involved in the event. So supposing I'm afraid because I'm going to be giving a speech, or that never really bothered me, but just suppose that it did. When am I going to be fearful? Before I get there, it's going to develop into a higher pitch of anxiety. Then I find myself there, and I'm totally relaxed, and I'm giving the speech, and I'm even cracking jokes, and it's a great experience. And when I'm finished, I say, why was I afraid? It wasn't near as bad as I thought it was going to be. But when did I start to lose the fear? When I was actually in the situation, because now the situation is present. It's a present reality, and you are not anticipating anything in the future. It's in the here and now, and you're handling it. You'd be surprised the people that get so nervous before an appointment, and when they get to the appointment, they just relax and they go through it and they're fine. The bunch on the wrist was not cancer. They're not going to die of anything, you know. They did fine in their solo. They may have missed a note. Who cares? Usually nobody even knows, because if you know your instrument and you know how to play it, well, I did a solo once and I lost my place, so I made the whole thing up. Nobody knew the difference. It sounded all right. I just did it creatively. Oh yeah, I think the snow will work. And I just went ahead and did it. I was fine. I wasn't nervous. And they were fine. They never knew I had a problem. So we anticipate, and when we anticipate, we tend to anticipate the worst. We always anticipate the worst. But usually it is never as bad as what you think it is going to be. And so you just continue on, and when you know that to be the fact, you can tell yourself, as I said, I do believe in self-talk. I'm feeling anxiety. I've got to acknowledge that so my body doesn't have to fight to have it recognized, and I'm not fighting to stop it because that only makes it worse. I just let it happen, and also I'm anticipating what I'm afraid of, and that's just anticipatory anxiety. And now that I know it's anticipatory anxiety, I don't have to be afraid. You know, because when I get into the situation, I'm going to relax and it's going to be all right. And if you can tell yourself like that, and if you're in a cyclic nature and you're having depression and you think you're never going to get out of it, you can tell yourself, how many times has this happened before? And I'm all right. And I do work out of it, and I'm fine. I work out of it, and I'm fine for a number of weeks before it happens again. It's not in my control, but it doesn't have to be in my control. I can let go of the control and let the body do what it normally does, that is, move me out of it. I mentioned unipolar depression. In that case, that's a special medical condition, a special psychological condition, and it's related to bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is a very difficult illness to handle, but most people don't have it, so I don't want to focus on it. But if you are bipolar, then you can get stuck in the depression and it does not lift. But there's all kinds of treatments now for mental conditions, so there's no reason why anyone should feel ashamed. Just like a broken arm, you go to a doctor, so you have some kind of a mental condition, you go to a psychologist or a counselor, you get relief, and the whole thing, your body just responds to that and you get better. Now I see I'm beginning to run out of time. This is going to take me longer than I thought it was, but what I want to go over is various things that you may be suffering from and how to get help. And if you can't afford professional help, what can you do to kind of help think your way out? What can you do to kind of reassure yourself so that you don't have to go through it so badly and that you get relief from it? So I'm taking this and giving it to you as a special segment, as a part of the grief and depression that I'm going into. I do some side issues sometimes because I think that they're going to be helpful, and when I think of that, I go into it, and hopefully it will be helpful. So we're going to continue with this next time. I'll close it here. Please join me next time.